Linux desktops in 2026 feel like the quiet revolution nobody saw coming, and yet somehow everyone is already living inside it. Imagine turning on your computer and instead of worrying about licenses, forced updates, tracking, or hardware limitations, the system simply adapts to you. That's the story of Linux desktops in 2026, not as an underdog anymore, but as a mature, confident ecosystem that finally feels ready for the mainstream without losing its soul. The desktop Linux experience today is the result of decades of experimentation, community-driven innovation, and a growing demand for freedom, privacy, and performance in personal computing. To really understand where Linux desktops are heading in 2026, you have to look at how people actually use computers now, how hardware has evolved, and how software expectations have completely shifted. By 2026, the idea of a desktop computer is no longer limited to a traditional PC sitting under a desk. Linux desktops are running on laptops, mini PCs, tablets, ARM-based devices, developer boards, and even high-end workstations with AI accelerators. This flexibility is one of Linux's greatest strengths. Unlike proprietary operating systems that often lag behind hardware trends, Linux adapts quickly. ARM desktops are no longer experimental toys. They're genuinely usable daily drivers. Thanks to better kernel support, improved graphics drivers, and optimized desktop environments, ARM-powered Linux machines feel fast, efficient, and battery-friendly. This matters because the future of computing is power-efficient and portable, and Linux is perfectly positioned for that shift. One of the most noticeable changes in Linux desktops in 2026 is polish. For years, Linux had a reputation for being powerful but rough around the edges. That reputation is fading fast. Desktop environments like GNOME, KDE Plasma, Cinnamon, Cosmic, and others have reached a level of refinement where they can compete visually and functionally with anything else on the market. Animations are smooth, touchpad gestures feel natural, fractional scaling actually works, and high DPI displays are handled gracefully. Wayland is now the default display server on most major distributions, delivering better security, smoother graphics, and improved multi-monitor support compared to the old X11 days. For the average user, this transition is invisible, and that's exactly the point. Things just work. Customization remains a core part of the Linux desktop identity, but in 2026 it's no longer a requirement, it's a choice. You can install a Linux distribution and never touch a configuration file. Never open a terminal and still have a fully functional, modern desktop. At the same time, power users can still tweak everything from window behavior to kernel parameters. This balance is crucial. Linux desktops no longer force users to be techy to be productive, but they still reward curiosity and experimentation. That's a big reason why developers, creators, and even gamers are increasingly comfortable calling Linux their primary OS. Speaking of gaming, Linux desktops in 2026 are in a completely different league compared to just a few years ago. Thanks to technologies like Proton, Vulkan, and better GPU driver support, gaming on Linux is no longer a niche hobby. Most Windows games run on Linux with little to no effort, often with performance that matches or even exceeds their Windows counterparts. Game launchers integrate smoothly, controllers work out of the box, and anti-cheat compatibility has improved dramatically. For many gamers, the idea that Linux can't game feels outdated and almost laughable now. This shift has had a huge impact on desktop adoption because gaming has always been one of the biggest barriers for people considering a switch to Linux. Productivity on Linux desktops in 2026 feels more cloud-aware and more offline capable at the same time, which might sound contradictory but actually makes perfect sense. Web apps are more powerful than ever, and Linux integrates them seamlessly, whether through browsers, progressive web apps, or containerized environments. At the same time, native applications remain strong. Office suites, design tools, video editors, IDEs, and communication apps are widely available, either as native Linux builds or through universal packaging systems like Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage. These formats have matured significantly, solving many of the dependency and compatibility issues that plagued Linux in the past. Installing software feels consistent and predictable, regardless of the distribution you're using. One of the most important trends shaping Linux desktops in 2026 is privacy. As more users become aware of data collection, telemetry, and digital surveillance, Linux stands out as a platform that respects user autonomy. Most Linux distributions collect little to no telemetry by default. And when they do, it's usually transparent and optional. This resonates strongly with users who are tired of feeling like the product instead of the customer. Linux desktops empower people to control what runs on their machines, what data is shared, and how updates are handled. This sense of ownership is subtle but powerful, and it's one of the reasons Linux adoption continues to grow steadily rather than explosively. AI integration is another major piece of the Linux desktop story in 2026. Instead of being locked into proprietary cloud-based AI services, Linux desktops often offer local AI tools that run directly on your hardware. From code assistants and image generators to speech recognition and personal knowledge bases, many AI features can run offline or with minimal cloud dependency. This is partly due to Linux's efficiency and partly due to its openness, which makes it easier for developers to experiment and optimize. For professionals and enthusiasts alike, this means more control, better performance, and fewer privacy concerns. The desktop becomes not just a place to consume content, but a powerful environment for creation and experimentation. Another interesting shift in Linux desktops in 2026 is the way updates are handled. Rolling release distributions have become more stable and user-friendly, while fixed release distributions have improved their update mechanisms to be less disruptive. Atomic and immutable desktops are gaining popularity, where the core system is read-only and updates are applied as snapshots. This approach reduces the risk of system breakage and makes rollbacks easy if something goes wrong. For users, this translates to confidence. Updating your system no longer feels like a gamble. It feels routine and safe, which is exactly how it should be. Accessibility has also improved significantly. Linux desktops now offer better screen readers, improved high-contrast themes, customizable input methods, and more consistent accessibility APIs across applications. This progress is driven by both community effort and institutional support, as Linux continues to be adopted in education, government, and enterprise environments. When an operating system is used by such a diverse range of people, accessibility stops being an afterthought and becomes a core requirement. In 2026, Linux desktops feel more inclusive than ever before. The role of Linux desktops in education is especially important. Schools and universities increasingly rely on Linux-based systems for teaching programming, data science, cybersecurity, and even general computing. Students learn not just how to use software, but how systems actually work. This creates a new generation of users who are comfortable with Linux from the start, rather than seeing it as an alternative or a last resort. As these students enter the workforce, they bring that familiarity with them, further strengthening Linux's position in professional environments. Enterprise adoption also feeds back into the desktop experience. As companies deploy Linux on workstations for developers, engineers, and creative professionals, they invest in better tooling, better support, and better hardware compatibility. This benefits everyone. Hardware vendors are more willing to provide Linux drivers. Software companies are more likely to release native Linux versions of their products, and the ecosystem as a whole becomes healthier. By 2026, running Linux on a high-end laptop or workstation no longer feels like a compromise. It feels intentional. One of the quieter but most impactful changes in Linux desktops is how distributions present themselves. The old culture of fragmentation, while still present, feels less chaotic. Distros have clearer identities and target audiences. Some focus on stability, some on cutting-edge features, some on aesthetics, and some on minimalism. Users don't have to understand every technical detail to choose a distribution that fits their needs. This clarity lowers the barrier to entry and makes the Linux desktop landscape feel more approachable. Community remains at the heart of Linux desktops in 2026. Forums, chat platforms, documentation, and user-generated content play a huge role in shaping the experience. When something breaks, there's usually someone who's already faced the same issue and shared a solution. When a new feature appears, there are blog posts, videos, and tutorials explaining it in plain language. This culture of sharing is hard to quantify, but it's one of Linux's greatest strengths. It turns users into participants rather than passive consumers. Looking at the broader future of desktop computing, Linux desktops represent a different philosophy. Instead of locking users into ecosystems, Linux encourages interoperability. Instead of hiding complexity, it offers layers of abstraction that users can peel back if they want. In 2026, this philosophy feels increasingly relevant. As people grow tired of closed platforms and unpredictable changes imposed from above, Linux offers an alternative that feels grounded and respectful. Of course, Linux desktops are not perfect, and pretending otherwise would miss the point. Some proprietary software is still unavailable or only partially supported. Hardware compatibility, while vastly improved, can still be hit or miss with very new or very niche devices. The learning curve, though gentler than before, still exists, but what's changed is the context. These issues are no longer deal breakers for most users. They're trade-offs, and many people are willing to make them in exchange for control, transparency, and performance. By 2026, the Linux desktop is no longer just about escaping something else. It's not only about leaving Windows or macOS behind. It's about choosing a platform that aligns with how you want to use technology. Whether that means a clean, distraction-free workspace, a highly customized power user setup, a secure development environment, or a lightweight system that breathes new life into old hardware, Linux desktops deliver options without forcing a single vision on everyone. As we look ahead, it's clear that Linux desktops will continue to evolve alongside broader trends like AI, edge computing, and sustainable technology. Their flexibility makes them ideal for experimentation, and their openness ensures that innovation isn't limited to a single company's roadmap. In a world where computing is becoming more personal and more political at the same time, Linux desktops offer a reminder that technology can still be shaped by communities, rather than controlled exclusively by corporations. So when we talk about Linux desktops in 2026, we're not just talking about themes, icons, or window managers. We're talking about a future of desktop computing that prioritizes choice, respects users, and adapts to change without losing its core values. It's a future where the desktop is not a shrinking relic of the past, but a living, evolving environment that still matters in an age of cloud services and mobile apps. And for millions of users around the world, that future is already here, running quietly and confidently on their screens every single day.